So you decided to make a cleric and everyone is yelling at you to heal them or stay back where it's safe so that when their weakling characters inevitably go down, you can pick them back up. But maybe you're tired of being the party healer. Maybe you're tired of peace. Maybe you just want never-ending conflict. Let's discuss a very special subclass for clerics, the war domain. Hi there, I'm just a second level fighter who likes talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and if you'd like to see more content covering the game, you should consider subscribing. But enough about that. Today we're diving into what might just be the most exciting cleric subclass. The war domain is devoted to the gods and deities that embody and proliferate warfare in all of its forms. And on the surface, that might sound like a bit of a turn-off, but there are many reasons to go to war. To defend yourself and your people, to carry out justice when nobody else will, to conquer what probably doesn't belong to you, or even to simply have a decades-long powwow just for the hell of it. No matter your reasoning, however, when you make a war cleric, you are making a character that is more than happy to get stuck into the thick of things alongside your fighter, barbarian, and paladin buddies. Speaking of allies, while the war cleric is absolutely the fightiest of all the clerics, it's always helpful to remember that the cleric itself is genuinely a support class at heart. While you can rebel against that nature, keep in mind that support and cooperation is a massive part of warfare. However, the option to slap on a shield and some heavy armor and wade in waist deep into a bloody morass of enemies is definitely there, and I highly advise you take it if you plan on making a war cleric. This subclass was built to exist on the front lines after all. You may not be the people opener slinging powerhouse like your martial counterparts, but it doesn't matter because you have the gift of spellcasting bestowed upon you by a literal god that may or may not have invented the very concept of warfare. That same concept that your pretender friends profess to know so much about, and believe me, this subclass can wield that power to some scary effect. Okay, let's dive into the actual mechanical meat, starting off with the subclass features you get at 3rd level. Guided Strike is a channel divinity option that allows you to add a +10 bonus to a hit roll for an attack that misses. This can be one of your own attacks or an ally's within 30 feet of you. If you use this ability on an ally, then you must spend your reaction to do so, but not if you use it on yourself. This is quite a strong little feature, especially considering that while you don't necessarily make a lot of attacks, the ones you do make can slap. It's also great that you can decide to use this after you have all the information. You'll generally know if the bonus will change it into a hit. Then you get War Priest. This feature allows you to make a weapon attack or an unarmed strike as a bonus action. You can do so a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier, and you regain all uses on a short or long rest. Now, this feature sounds good, but there are a few things you need to keep in mind. Unless you rolled some amazing ability scores, your bonus to actual weapon attacks may not be too inspiring. As a cleric, you need to pump up your wisdom for your spellcasting. Later on, we'll cover a way around that, but even then, you have some other stuff to do with your bonus action. But when this feature does work, it feels good. Finally, at 3rd level, you get access to a list of domain spells that you always have prepared. Speaking of which, let's briefly cover those spells. A lot of them are just taken straight from the cleric spell list, and that might not sound too exciting, but believe me, getting them for free and being able to take other spells is awesome. So at 3rd level, you get Guiding Bolt, which is quite potent at its base level. It does sadly stop being as efficient as you get a few levels under your belt, but still a nice addition to have. Shield of Faith is your other 1st level spell offering from this feature, and it is a decent boost to the target's AC, and yes, you don't have to use it on yourself, but you can combine it with heavy armor and a shield for a gross number if you choose. Then Magic Weapon is just solid, particularly if you're put in a situation where you or an ally doesn't have access to the means to fight enemies that resist mundane people openers. Spiritual Weapon, however, is where some of the power of this class and subclass comes into play. You summon a spectral floating weapon that deals force damage, a fair amount of it by the way, and to top it off, you command this thing as a bonus action. Now it does require concentration, but a quick spoiler, you have a way around that. Anyways, at 5th level, you get some 3rd level spells in Crusader's Mantle and Spirit Guardians. Crusader's Mantle is interesting to say the least. You can use it to buff up a horde of allies and make their attacks sting just a little bit more. However, Spirit Guardians is one of the strongest spells available to clerics, especially the type of cleric that runs at the enemies with the intention of sticking to them, and surprise surprise, that just so happens to be our goal here. You make an aura that consistently damages nearby enemies and slows them down. At 7th level, Fire Shield is great for some fiery or not so fiery resistance and retribution, and Freedom of Movement can put in some incredible work when used in the right situation. Now, at 9th level, you get 2 bangers. Hold Monster is just crazy good and is used to paralyze creatures, which means that melee attacks made against them within 5 feet become automatic crits. And something that blew my mind when I saw it for the first time in the 2024 PHB, they gave War Cleric Steelwind Strike. This is basically an anime-inspired spell that lets you teleport and smack a bunch of enemies for 6d10 force damage. Very cool and appropriate for the war domain. Right, getting back to the rest of the features, there are only two more. At 6th level, you get War God's Blessing, and this feature harkens back to the glory days of clerics in early 5e. Basically, you can expend a use of Channel Divinity to cast either Shield of Faith or Spiritual Weapon without concentration. Now, you can only cast them at their lowest level, and they only last a minute, but yeah, this is quite strong. Spiritual Weapon used to be paired with Spirit Guardians for a crazy low to mid-level combo that did a ton of damage. You are now the only cleric that can still do that. It is a bit sad that you can't upcast Spiritual Weapon in this way, but it's a small price to pay. Also, this is why you probably won't see a lot of use out of your War Priest feature. You'll be too busy slapping the non-believers with a people opener ordained by God or whatever passes for your chosen deity. Finally, your capstone ability is Avatar of Battle. You simply get resistance to all bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage at 17th level. It comes online very late, but it is the perfect feature to sum up exactly what you're going to be doing as a high-level war cleric, wading into an opposing force and tearing things up. Moving on, it's always helpful to keep some general class tips in mind and how they might influence your character. In this case, there's a fair amount aiding the war domain in its goal of becoming a holy warrior. So, firstly, just a reminder, you are a wisdom-based spellcaster, and you get access to up to 9th level spells throughout your adventuring career. So once again, pump your wisdom to keep those spells effective. Then you have a d8 as your hit die. This isn't exactly the most ideal situation for someone who wants to hang about on the front lines in combat, but it could definitely be worse. An awesome new feature that you get at 1st level is Divine Order. Here you choose between proficiency with martial weapons and heavy armor, or an extra cantrip and better arcana and religion checks. You didn't choose to follow the literal god of war for nothing, so the choice is simple: suit up. Channel Divinity is also a feature with a lot of utility. Unless you're fighting the undead and you can do a bunch of radiant damage with the Seer option in optimal conditions, in other words drop a holy fireball on a horde of zombies or skeletons, you might be better off saving your Channel Divinity uses for your war domain features. Blessed Strikes is another feature that allows you to choose between the martial life and better cantrip shenanigans. This time, however, there is an argument to be made for the cantrip option, because later on it gives some temporary hit points in addition to the extra damage, but I'd still recommend the option that adds extra d8s to one weapon attack per turn. Finally, Divine Intervention lets you replicate the effects of a 5th level or lower cleric spell once per long rest. You don't need to spend a spell slot or provide material components, but you do still need to concentrate on it. However, at 20th level, you can use this feature to cast Wish, which can replicate the effects of any 8th level or lower spell from any class's spell list, and you don't need to meet any of the spell's requirements. Depending on which side of the Wish debate you lie on, this might mean that you don't have to concentrate on it, because concentration is referred to as a requirement multiple times in the PHP. But once again, this idea is heavily debated and has been since the beginning of 5e. Let me know what side of the fence you fall onto. Moving on, we're going to cover two options from each level of spell available to clerics that could be great tools in any war cleric's arsenal. These are just my thoughts and they aren't even necessarily the best or strongest options. Keep in mind the war domain spell list has some amazing spells and I'm not going to repeat them here, and the cleric spell list is a bit small at certain levels. So take these with a grain of salt and always choose whatever spells look best for you and your character. For cantrips, Guidance is great for boosting skill checks, and Toll the Dead is probably the best range damaging cantrip for clerics when used on a creature that is missing some hit points. It's nice to have something that doesn't only deal radiant damage. Diversify a bit. Bless is one of the best support spells even at high levels, but maybe isn't worth your concentration later on. Cure Wounds is just mental now. It restores an absurd amount of hit points thanks to the 2024 PHP, and it scales like crazy with bigger level spell slots. For 2nd level, I chose Aid and Warding Bond, two defensive options. Aid gives 3 people extra hit points for basically an entire adventuring day, and these are not temporary hit points by the way. The only problem here is that a lot of players forget to remove the hit points later on when the spell ends. Then, Warding Bond can be used to turn a friend into a complete tank by giving them extra AC and resistance to all damage. You do need to remain close by, and the damage they take is actually split between you and them instead of true resistance, but it is still an interesting option in the right circumstances. Okay, 3rd level is where I had to think outside the box. You already get Spirit Guardians from your subclass, and I refuse to shout out Revivify or any spell that returns a creature to life. So I ended up going with Animate Dead and Glyph of Warding. Now Animate Dead might sound antithetical to a Holy Warrior's MO, but there's a lot of real world beliefs surrounding fallen warriors going to a special place when they expire, so keep that flavor in the back of your brain. The idea here is to raise a few skeletons and then buff them with Crusader's Mantle, forming a righteous phalanx to accompany you into battle. Is it strong? No, not really, but it is cool. Then Glyph of Warding can be used to create a trap, essentially. You can choose a trigger for the glyph, and when it is activated, it will either explode or release a spell that you store within the glyph. This can be any spell that you cast that matches the level of spell slot used on the glyph. You must still expend the additional spell slot for that spell, however. But a spell used in this way doesn't require concentration, which is mental. Yes, Glyph of Warding does require planning to use effectively because whatever the glyph is cast on can't move more than 10 feet or the spell ends, but it is crazy effective if set up just right. For 4th level, I chose Aura of Life and Banishment. I've covered Aura of Life in a previous video. It's a great little spell that can keep your allies fighting even against overwhelming odds. Then obviously Banishment is great. Sending a single terrifying enemy away for a few turns usually just results in a clean sweep. 5th level has an interesting array of spells to choose from. I settled on Holy Weapon, which seemed like the most appropriate choice for a war cleric. This allows you to buff up a weapon with divine power. It's best used on an ally that makes a lot of attacks, and I wouldn't exactly recommend using it on yourself, but yeah. Then Summon Celestial is just amazing. You get a divine soldier to back you up. They can fly, and you choose whether they have a 600-foot range bow or a melee weapon. Connect the dots here. The bow is broken even though the melee option provides some support to you and your allies. Continuing on, 6th level has my choices of Blade Barrier, a massive area of effect spell that can dictate the flow of battle by separating groups of enemies under threat of not too insignificant force damage, and Word of Recall. This is a get out of jail free card. It's basically the cleric version of teleport, but you go to a sanctuary or temple instead of the middle of a friggin' mountain. Conjure Celestial is a 7th level spell that summons a celestial force that heals allies and smites foes in an area of effect. It's pretty decent. Symbol is basically the big boy version of Glyph of Warding. You can't store spells in it, but it has some really nasty effects. Also, instead of a once-off explosion, the effect keeps pulsing for 10 minutes. It is legitimately broken if you can set it up correctly. At 8th level, you could consider taking Anti-Magic Field. I've also covered this spell before. It turns off all magic in an aura. Use with extreme caution. I cannot understate that. You've been warned. Then Holy Aura makes you and your allies that much harder to take down. It also presents a massive middle finger to fiendish and undead creatures. Finally, for 9th level, I picked Gate because it's an opportunity to yoink a really powerful creature from their home plane and see if they'll help you out in a battle. If you choose a Celestial, I assume the odds are in your favor. Also, Mass Heal is a reasonable option. You can distribute 700 points of healing however you see fit. No matter how you look at that, it's a lot. But I don't know, Cleric 9th level spells aren't super exciting. Alright, moving on to a few suggestions for feats, we have some unique options that most martial classes and spellcasters will overlook. I highly recommend taking Warcaster if you plan on using a shield. This allows you to perform the somatic components of a spell while both your hands are occupied with a weapon and shield. Additionally, you have better concentration checks, and you can cast a cantrip when making opportunity attacks, something that has some proper power with another feat option. Heavy Armor Master synergizes very well with your Capstone feature. It reduces the bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage you take. This applies before resistance and results in some great damage mitigation. Defensive Duelist allows you to boost your AC to obscene levels if you're wielding a finesse weapon. You can still use Strength for attack and damage rolls, or even another ability score, but we'll get to that shortly. Then, Charger adds a d8 extra damage if you run at your enemy before hitting them. You have a bunch of other features that do the same thing, so why not stack some dice? Inspiring Leader works with Charisma and Wisdom now to give your party some temporary hit points, great for creating a buffer to their health. And Sentinel allows you to reduce the speed of an enemy to 0 when you hit them with an opportunity attack. This works with Warcaster if the cantrip you make uses an attack roll, perfect for trapping your enemies in your Spirit Guardians. For Origin feats, I suggest Tough as usual. This will help with life on the front lines, like a lot. But Magic Initiate is also a very interesting option because you can take one of two cantrips, Shillelagh or True Strike. Now, Shillelagh will let you use your Wisdom for attack and damage rolls with a club or quarterstaff, in addition to making you hit like a truck. True Strike, however, lets you make an attack with a weapon as a cantrip, and it deals extra radiant damage and also hits reasonably hard. What if you could get access to both, though? I wonder. Alright, for species choices, let me teach you how to get access to both of those cantrips. As a kobold or a high elf, you get access to the True Strike cantrip. Combine this with Magic Initiate Druid and you have a very competent melee combatant that maximizes on their spellcasting ability. In addition to that, kobolds can let out a cry as a bonus action that gives them and their allies advantage on attack rolls. High elves also get some goodies with some spells that clerics don't have access to and an extra skill proficiency. You could also just be a human and take the druid and wizard versions of Magic Initiate, but that's no fun. A tiny warmongering kobold devoted to Bahamut scratches an ultra-specific itch, in my opinion. Now, multiclassing is an interesting proposition for the War Domain Cleric. I kinda want to suggest you stay away from it. Not many classes synergize too well with the wisdom requirement, with druids being the only other class devoted entirely to wisdom, and they don't mesh very well with the War Domain's vibe. However, if you are determined, then here's a few choices. Fighter is never not a good option for a 2-level dip. This just makes you better in combat with weapon mastery, fighting styles, and of course action surge. Just note that you can't cast spells with that extra action now. Taking it further with a subclass could also lead to some great results, particularly if you're willing to go all the way to get extra attack and aren't using cantrips. The Astral Self Monk is a weirdly good option too. This subclass allows you to use your wisdom modifier for your unarmed strikes, which pairs extremely well with a cleric. However, you can't wear armor, but that's neither here nor there. Then, if you're looking for a permanent buddy to head off to war with, consider 3 levels of Ranger and taking the Beastmaster subclass. The beast itself scales with wisdom, and if you take the mounted combatant feat and you ride it like a steed, then that thing will never get sent to the Shadow Realm. Rangers also have access to Shillelagh, so as much as this might sound like a gimmick, it really isn't. Rogues also make good multiclassing picks for weapon-focused clerics. Sneak attack stacks with blessed strikes, and making one big attack per turn has its own charm. The extra skills and expertise are also welcome. But yeah, like I mentioned, sticking it out as a pure cleric might actually be the best approach, particularly if you don't want to lose out on your high-level spells and abilities. Alright, that was the War Domain Cleric subclass. I really like what they've done with it in the 2024 Player's Handbook. It feels modern and powerful and evokes the vibe of an early 5e cleric. Although I may be biased because my first 5th edition character was a cleric after all. Anyways, if you've made it this far in the video, you're a legend and I really appreciate you. For real though, how do you think the War Domain holds up to the Twilight Domain? I'm curious. Is the Twilight Domain even that broken? I don't know, maybe. That's a problem for another video though. But yeah, that'll do it for this one. Cheers.